Well, hello, everybody. Happy Thursday. Here we are again. Delighted to see you all. Wonderful turnout, as always. I'm thrilled to say we've got David Bailey with us. I'm trying to find him on my mosaic of faces. I've also got my own voice coming at me from another speaker on the other side of the room. Hang on. Quick mute on the other PC. David, there you are, bottom right. How are you, David? Good to see you. Thank you for joining us today.
Good to be here. Thank you very much.
Terrific. And just admitting, Alison, before I get going with David, I just want to say something about Alison, who's just joining us. And I'm hoping that... Good evening, Alison. Afternoon, as it is in Atlanta, Georgia. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Excellent, thank you. Excellent indeed. Alison, as the email suggested, we got David Bailey to talk about some pressing subjects over here, but I would very much like to give you a little bit of time later on to talk about the virtual internships that you are pioneering.
Sure.
Because I know, education is an absolutely massive issue for us here. And you've got some very exciting and interesting stuff. So I would like to get to that. Right. Now, we all know, those of us who were on last week, that we were discussing the immediate aftermath of the budget. And in fact, I've been so busy, I hadn't noticed the news that Kwasi Kwarteng had very publicly dumped any mention of the words industrial strategy. And Jürgen Meyer and Vince Cable were on the call last week. So it was all a bit frantic and frenetic. Now, I don't want to necessarily go over all that stuff, but obviously a lot of what we're going to be discussing today in terms of regional policy will have an industrial strategy element to it. But I want to somehow, what's the word I'm looking for? Refine the issue a little bit with David to talk about the leveling up agenda, regional policy, the way in which this is going to affect manufacturers, and this wild card that has been thrown into the equation of free ports, which I think there's a big skeptical look out there on most people's faces when the word free ports is mentioned. So let's introduce David, professor at Birmingham University School of Business, and many other things besides. David, give us just a very, very, sort of 30-second elevator pitch about yourself.
Thanks, Nick. So I'm David. I was born in West Bromwich, grew up there and in Stoke, came to university at Birmingham, and I'm a Midlander through and through. Worked at Coventry, Aston universities. I did try and leave the region once, but I got a nosebleed. But I have worked all over the world in universities. Really interested in industrial strategy, manufacturing, and region. So I was really delighted that Nick asked me along today. Written very widely in an academic sense in that, but also try to contribute to policy debate. So one of the things I'm doing at the moment is as specialist advisor to the House of Commons Business Committee on post-pandemic growth. I'm also a senior fellow at the UK and a Changing Europe programme. And my project is particularly about how Brexit impacts on manufacturing, studying mainly automotive, but some other industries as well. So big interest in manufacturing. I suspect that I'm going to learn more from you tonight than the other way around, but I love debates like that. So looking forward to discussing.
Well, thank you. I mean, this is absolutely, as anybody who's familiar with the format knows, the whole goal is for us to engage with our guests as much as it is for them to engage with us. So a conversation rather than interviews and/or long statements. But anyway, David, let's just kick off. I just wonder, when you first heard the government talking about levelling up in the red walls / blue walls seats, where they obviously have a very strong vested interest in bringing prosperity to some of those places. When you first heard all of that, what was your immediate reaction? Did you automatically think, well, this is going to give a big boost somehow or other to manufacturing, which, over the decades has declined in some of those areas? We're going to see manufacturing coming back?
No, not necessarily. So I had mixed feelings about it. On the one hand, I was pleased that it was at least back on the agenda. So the Conservative Liberal coalition back, after 2010 had abolished regional development agencies and the Manufacturing Advisory Service, which I think had done a lot of good in some regions, at least, not necessarily all. But at least there was a recognition that spatially we are actually the most unbalanced spatial country in Western Europe. So the growth has been highly concentrated on London. London is effectively decoupled from the rest of the region. We don't see, productivity spillovers taking place. So the fact it's back on the agenda, great. My fear, though, is that it's kind of done in a very top-down, centralized way where the government doles out money to certain industries and certain places, those places being in particular where the government wants votes. So done badly, it ends up as kind of pork barrel politics. Now, whether we can still get through that, some positives, we'll see. A positive from the budget, for example, was this idea of super deductions, so accelerated capital allowances. That will benefit manufacturing in particular, and particularly capital-intensive manufacturing, which tend to be concentrated outside London. So there might be a levelling up positive from that. But all the evidence so far on how the government is giving out money in terms of its various funds is it tends to be concentrated on those seats which the Tories have won. So, I've mixed feelings about it. I think the government need to be pushed in terms of making it happen and supporting genuinely left behind places where there's a strong manufacturing presence.
Yeah, I sorry. Yeah, I thought I was unmuted for a second. Yes, I was. I just put up a story on LinkedIn about this investment in Teesside today. 20 million for a subsidiary of GE Renewable Energy, LM Wind Power, to build a blade factory on the site of an old steel factory there. I mean, it's so fascinating to see the way that industries come and go, and steel factory died, and now a blade factory is going to go in there. And they've got another 75 million for what they call wind ports. Teesside is going to be a wind port as well as a free port, but there's going to be another wind port on the South Humberside area of Lincolnshire. 6,000 jobs, all very good, and it's all very good green credentials for Boris in COPAC. Is it COPAC? COP26, whatever it's called. So anyway, I think we can obviously see the first manifestations of this. I just wonder about SME manufacturing, which of course is the great focus for an awful lot of us. Whether you think there's going to be any spillover, any benefit for that, David?
A good question. I honestly don't know the answer to that. Clearly, SMEs have really, many of them have taken the brunt of COVID. The support hasn't always got to them necessarily. So there are still parts of the economy which, whilst the Chancellor has intervened in terms of furlough and grant support and so on, there are some SMEs who've simply not managed to get that sort of funding. So big gap still in terms of COVID support. Longer term, are SMEs going to benefit from this? They may benefit from things like super deductions. Free ports, which you mentioned, I can't really see them benefiting them much unless they move into a free port. And I think there's a lot of skepticism about free ports because most of the academic evidence, by the way, there's a great report out from UK and Changing Europe on this just last week, is that free ports tend to encourage activity to shift from one place to another. So we end up giving big tax breaks just to move stuff around. Now, you might say, well, that's okay if it's going to the places that are left behind. Are they really left behind places, or are they Conservative voting places? That's a different sort of issue. So a lot of skepticism about free ports. Where they have worked, it's been part of a more where special enterprise zones have worked more generally, it's been part of a more holistic industrial strategy where you look at not only tax breaks, but also infrastructure, land, skills and training, and other things as well. So you've got to think holistically. Now, the danger is that, as you discussed last week, I'm really sorry I missed it last week, homeschooling got in the way, I'm afraid. But the danger is with the government rowing back on industrial strategy, we see local economic strategy, industrial strategies not being so important. And also, industrial strategy, I don't think the government quite got where it had got to. It's no longer about central government, kind of in a top-down way, giving out support. It's a process of collaboration. If you think about the role of the Aerospace Alliance or the Automotive Council, it's about bringing together government and business, whether at a national level or a regional level, to identify challenges and opportunities and develop policies then on the back of that. So it's a process of participation, bringing actors together. My genuine fear here is from rowing back from industrial strategy, we lose that participatory approach. So I think we've got to fight to keep that in whatever policy comes up, whether it's growing back better or whatever the slogan is. That participation and the collaboration between government and business is absolutely critical. Just to give you one, sorry, I'll stop after this, one flavour of that. When COVID kicked off and we had that ventilator challenge, we were really concerned we didn't have enough ventilators. Government industrial policy at that point, policy showed the worst and the best. So on the one hand, where government said, right, here's the design, go and build it, complete disaster. Where government worked with business and the high value manufacturing catapult led the way in terms of scaling up manufacturers to work with existing ventilator builders to then scale up production quickly, it was utterly brilliant. So the collaborative approach was great. Top-down direction fails miserably. My fear is that we've gone for this hard form of Brexit, taking back sovereignty. My fear is we end up with a kind of top-down sort of industrial policy, which may not work very well.
Okay, anybody like to jump in on this and ask David some questions? Because even though as a journalist, I like to think I know absolutely everything on every single topic and I'm the best person, most qualified person to ask questions, it's funny how that hasn't always panned out and turned out to be the case. So who'd like to throw their hat in the ring and get involved in the conversation? Yeah, Richard, good evening to you. Nice to see you.
Hi. I've worked in Siemens Gamesa factory in Brande in Denmark. And in those days, we were talking 4 or 5 megawatt, and now we're talking 15 megawatt turbines. So I think for GE to come to the UK is a big deal. And to come to Teesside, I don't actually see it as a red wall, blue wall thing. I think Teesside is a natural place. I went to university in Newcastle, so the great rivers of the Tyne, the Wear, the Tees, the Humber have been industrial rivers, for donkey's years, and it's a good thing to happen. In terms of the and obviously with Siemens Gamesa have a plant in Hull on the Humber as well, and we've got Vestas on the Isle of Wight. So we've now got 3 wind turbine factories. You could say Johnny come lately, but it's good news for the UK. But it's particularly good news for GE to come to the UK though, because it's a huge wind farm on Dogger Bank, which is going to be getting on for 10% of the UK's demand. It's sort of 3.5 gigawatt, and the UK typical demand is about 35 gigawatts. So it's huge. The impact on SMEs though is not going to be big because if it's just a blade factory, there isn't a great deal in making. Okay, it's a huge blade, it's 110 meters long, but there's not a great deal of subcontractor tier 2, tier 3 impact on that. If they were making the rest of the turbine, the nacelle and the gearbox and the power generation, but overall, a great day for today for the UK, and a great day to welcome GE to the northeast of the UK.
Thanks, Richard. Just a clarification. I think GE they have some involvement in other parts of the country inland, the renewable energy company, but this is off, in terms of that, this is off the scale. This is they claim that there'll be 1,500 jobs created in the value chain. I don't know quite what that means. They're suggesting, obviously, somewhere in that it's going to trickle down. But you make an excellent point about the fact that there's not an awful lot to wind turbine blades. They're balsa wood, epoxy resin, and fiberglass. So that's it. Who else has got some thoughts on this? I can see Brett Van Rensburg. Thank you very much for joining us, by the way. The finger behind you, the hand of God almost, is slightly disconcerting. I thought you put your hand up, but very warm welcome. I'm not going to pressure you to ask a question if you like. Alison, I'm going to come to you, not to talk about the virtual interns yet, but can you just talk to us about GE? Just give us a little bit of a hint, because obviously it's an American company, and give us a sense of its scale, because Richard was talking about how large it is.
It is. It's very, very large, but in the US, they have it under a lot of different names too. So we've got, if you're familiar enough with US geography, I know that there's a substantial plant in Kentucky. And then there are a couple other plants out west. I want to say, I'm not as familiar now. I think I was more familiar a few years ago about where they were. But I think that there are also some interesting pieces with the relationship between GE and some of its like sister companies, I guess is if you want to call it that. Several years ago, I believe, do you remember Dowdy Propellers, I believe, in the UK? Yeah. I think they had a fire at their plant several years ago. Yeah. And if memory serves, and please someone correct me if I'm misspeaking here, but Dowdy had a relationship with GE, or maybe there's some sort of business relationship there. We needed a plastic brush cover that only Dowdy made. And these brush covers literally went on a piece of a piece of a piece of an assembly. And then the end user took the covers off and threw them away in a dumpster. But until we were able to get these brush covers, we could not supply Lockheed Martin with a product, with an assembly. And so there's some interesting supply chain conversations, I think, too, to have when it comes to GE and sister companies and so on and so forth.
My only relationship with Dowdy is that they were a Gloucestershire company, and I used to go play cricket against the works team. That's all I can tell you about them, but that's a long time ago. Was that Philip waving? Were you waving? Yes, Philip. Good evening.
Evening. Yeah, Dowdy Propellers not very far from me in Gloucestershire. They did have a factory, and they had a huge recovery. They actually used GE facilities, because GE Power Systems have a facility at Bishop's Cleeve, and they actually went over there and relocated for a period of time until the factory was rebuilt. So yeah, there is a relationship there on power systems. So GE were very helpful in supplying space for them to do that over that period of time. But yeah, they're back up and running again now. In fact, they're involved in various collaborative projects with the MTC on various digital projects on propellers development work. So you'll see those kind of innovative solutions starting to come out as well.
Thank you, Philip. Thanks for that background. And thanks, Alison. Paul, are you waving to say hello? You're muted, mate.
I'm unmuted now. I'm going to be a bit controversial, because I think, just to put a bit of petrol on the fire, I was interested. Alison talked last week about the role of government in the US and sort of the whole notion of the government supporting industry, and it seemed like it was very much more a hands-off. I guess, David, we're talking about a very much more hands-on approach. I've been really underwhelmed by some of the innovation catapults and some of the other things that's been happening in the government, and how the money's been funneled into several very large companies rather than spread around, and how they've been, should we say, used as ways of funding, and they stop very much short of actually helping a lot of SMEs. So I put that out there as a piece of controversy and maybe ask for some debate around that, because I get underwhelmed when government gets involved. It seems a reason not to rather than a reason to.
If I can make just a quick observation about the American system, you're right. As Alison was explaining, they don't like to get involved in the civilian manufacturing. So what they do is they route everything through the military, and then it sort of comes out the other end as a government funded. But it's like
well, they have a lot of national laboratories as well. They have a lot of
they have the science and the National Institutes of Health and the Science Centre. Yeah. Anyway, David, can I throw that firecracker into your lap that Paul just lit? And because the catapults are lauded as the right thing to do. In other words, if they weren't there, we'd be looking for something like that. But they have got a fairly patchy record. I wonder what your thoughts are.
I mean, I think that's a fair point. I think on the whole, they were set up for the right reasons in terms of getting ideas out of university and laboratories into the commercial world. So I think what they were set up to do was right. Partly they're being asked to do something different because when the industrial strategy back in, whenever it was, 2017, 18, finally it came out, Greg Clark was trying to join up sort of sector technology in place. The Treasury effectively thwarted that. So there was no join up of industrial strategy at the local level. They were later in local industrial strategies, but they were quite limited. So the catapults de facto they were supporting certain technologies, but also were located in certain places. So they also became sort of place-based. And they started then to support some of the big companies around that. You've also got other bodies, Innovate UK, I think, do a reasonably good job. But I think your point more broadly is very well placed. Now, go back in time, of course, there were organisations like the Manufacturing Advisory Service, which were regionally based. Again, they perform differently in different places, but my own experience in the West Midlands was extremely positive. And, I think if linking back to the earlier points, if we want to see more in terms of sourcing from, say, small and medium-sized enterprises in the UK from some of the big companies, we need to help SMEs bid for contracts, have the finance in place, tool up, and all the other things they need to do. So government previously had something like the Advanced Manufacturing Supply Chain Initiative that did a reasonable amount of work on a small funding, but was abolished. Similarly, the Manufacturing Advisory Service was abolished. So if we were really serious about this, I think we would bring back something like the Manufacturing Advisory Service to help the supply chain, especially when we know there are some opportunities. We know there are opportunities potentially around reshoring, bringing some activities back to the UK, but small firms need to be helped in order to be able to do that. So, yeah, it's a fair point, I think, about catapults, differential performance. I think the other issue is that they were set up because the market was failing in some sense, this kind of valley of death between ideas through to commercialization, but were very quickly put under pressure to be commercial. So we've got to allow them to continue thinking long term and not actually start to pay for themselves very quickly.
I guess one of the things in a way, the government collects the taxes and then they spend it for us. So if what we're seeing now with the 125% tax break back to encourage investment would that not be a far better tool to promote rather than taking money and spending it where the government? I mean, I'm of an age where I remember DeLorean and a lot of other monies that went into industry that were abject failures. So as you said about the ventilator challenge, government gets involved and it becomes very bureaucratic and very slow. So I just put that out there as the government is there, they collect our taxes and we see all these bodies but actually if the government had a smaller view on the economy and actually collected less taxes but actually encouraged more rebates, would that help us more?
I don't think it's quite that simple. I mean, I would agree with you in terms of top-down policy not working, and that's why I think this participatory approach where government works with business and a process of collaboration and it works together is really important. But I don't think there's any kind of correlation between small government and a better performing manufacturing sector or economy. And in fact, those economies that have strong manufacturing, if we think about Germany, they do have an industrial policy. It's often run at a regional level, but you've got a banking system set up to support manufacturing. You've got things like part-time wage subsidies, big policy on Industry 4.0, lots of government intervention. Similarly, in the US, there's an industrial policy, but it's opaque. As we heard, it's often through the Department of Defense, but also in other ways. We laud the US in terms of their venture capital industry. When that was created, most of it was government funding. So, the government intervenes in the US, I think, in quite a clever way, particularly through procurement. It's interesting, one of the things the government is doing is trying to copy the ideas around DARPA, where the government tries to support innovation. Now, that's high-risk stuff, but I think why not try it? I mean, I think we can learn from other countries elsewhere. But I don't think there's a correlation between small government and manufacturing and economic success. I think the government does have a positive role to play in terms of industrial policy, but not in a top-down way.
Alison, did you have your hand up a second ago, or?
Did. I had a question to see, I guess just throwing it out to the room or get Mr. Bailey's take on this. In the US, we have the idea that rather than add another layer of bureaucracy or government when somebody wants to take an initiative for something, that it kind of complicates matters. So in your eyes, if you had the ability to replace something currently within the UK system to encourage manufacturing sector, is there an organization or an initiative that you would replace in lieu of? That's
a great question. So government a few years ago abolished what were called regional development agencies, bodies tasked with regional economic development. Part of the argument was it was an unnecessary layer. Now what we have are local enterprise partnerships, combined authorities, and in some cases, overarching bodies called Midlands Engine or Northern Powerhouse. Nobody quite knows what they do. So we've now got 3 layers, but before we had 1. So let's just simplify all of that and go back to a regional tier, which can lead on things like support for Industry 4.0, diversifying manufacturing, rebuilding supply chain. Way too complicated, messy. It's the old problem of if you've got a problem, who do you call? Who are you going to call? Is it the LEP? Is it the combined authorities, Midlands Engine? Nobody knows anymore.
Yeah, and that is absolutely bang on the money. And of course, the RDAs were set up by who? By the Labour government, which means that a Conservative government would be extremely reluctant. I mean, they only killed it because Labour started it, and it was quite successful. Ewan, good evening to you.
Good evening. I'm going to say sort of here. I think one of the challenges is not necessarily, let's say, how government is getting involved. It's the fact that they keep moving the goalposts. So, it becomes a vanity project for one political party or, at the moment, one business secretary. And as we know, we've had 3 business secretaries in the last 2 years, and they want to put their own stamp on things because that's what sort of new bosses do. And it means that, no sooner has somebody come on board, changed the name, changed the policy, that, bearing in mind that most of these policies take 6 to 12 months to sort of trickle down. So by the time that actually people, let's say at the grassroots level, are getting their heads around what they need to do, there's an element of, well, oh, goodness me, this is so complicated, or it's changed again. And then you sort of almost have this, it's like wading through treacle, so nothing happens. And then you get an element of sort of people can't be bothered because they get to the point where, well, we tried that last time and it didn't work, or we tried that last time and it got changed again. And unfortunately, we have this sort of almost, this stalemate, which is really frustrating because, we're the ones who ultimately have to try and navigate through it. And anyway, so yes, that's I'm going to say an observation. I guess if I can just ask a question of David, and great to hear his views. As I understand, he's a professor of business economics at the Birmingham Business School. So this question is more about the sort of educational establishments, and what can we be doing again from a hashtag industry technology or manufacturing perspective, to engage with the educational establishments and this joined up thinking idea, which he clearly has is absolutely involved with.
Yeah, great question. For a start, yes, some universities are better than others in terms of engaging with business and manufacturing. So some will have, I remember 10 years ago having a big battle at Birmingham when I was there previously to say, right, let's have a year in industry. And the view of management was, well, that's what another university down the road do. We don't want to do that. So no, we have to do it. We got it in place in the end. And now a large chunk of our students do a year in business, often in manufacturing. So doing that is really important. Getting pupils and students into manufacturing, business in general, but manufacturing particularly early enough, can really arouse their excitement and get them engaged in it. We also need to be doing much more in terms of providing support for SMEs to engage with businesses. So some of the universities I've been involved with pioneered the idea of innovation vouchers. You get given a voucher, you go to university, you work with them to help you solve a particular problem. I think the big challenge we've got coming through with things like Industry 4.0 is a whole load of technologies which will create loads of jobs and also destroy jobs. And we've got to enable people to be reskilled and retrained throughout their careers. That isn't something we're very good at in the UK. Some places like Singapore are good at it, Scandinavian countries, Germany. Universities, I think, have got a really big role there, but it's very different to what they've done traditionally. It's about engaging with the population as a whole. We might have done it in, say, an MBA executive sense, but not more generally. So we've got to think about how we can use the expertise in universities to reskill, retrain people throughout their lives as we embrace new technologies and the economy changes. So that involves universities being quite different. I mean, I worked at Birmingham for many years, then went to Coventry, then Aston, now back at Birmingham. It's fascinating how they do different things, but increasingly, universities are going into businesses to deliver degree courses in a bespoke way to managers who may not have been at university first time round, but it gives them the chance then to get into university education. We need to be doing much more of that, as well as part-time study, blended study. I mean, one of the things that's come out of the coronavirus crisis is, I've been stuck at home actually for the last year, partly because of shielding. So I've had to deliver everything online. I've completely revamped all my teaching. I don't think we'll ever go back to the way we did it before. It's going to be blended in some sense. That opens up opportunities to reach people in manufacturing who might not be able to come into the classroom. So let's use that crisis in a positive way. I mean, there's that saying, never waste a good crisis. Let's use it to think about how we can deliver education and training to a wider range of people throughout their lives.
Alison, I'm going to come to you to talk about virtual internships now, because if there was a segue set up, David just knocked it out of the park for you. There you go. Off you go. What are virtual internships? How do they work?
Sure. So, I'm excited to talk to you guys about this. So, and I'm really curious too to get some feedback from different people that haven't been in the weeds, so to speak, about all this. So last March, just like everybody else, we were kind of poised to take on a couple of interns, and at the very last minute had to cancel. I'm not very good at saying no. And so I called the teacher to cancel, and another teacher, literally I was picking up the phone to call this other teacher. Another teacher called and said, I have a few interns that they've got their internships canceled because of this impending pandemic. Can you take them? And my first thought was, well, if they can't take them, why would I take them? But then I said, no, I can't take them in-house, but I have a virtual concept I'm developing. And he said, oh, really? And I said, yes, I just came up with that on the spot. So I hung up with him and I spent the next 48 hours developing this idea that was, okay, if these students, these high school juniors and seniors were essentially, they were interested in engineering or manufacturing or just STEM in general, my take was you can't be what you can't see. And so therefore, if you don't know things are out there as opportunities, if you don't know there are options out there, not just your traditional engineer, maybe a kid doesn't necessarily want to design an aircraft part. Well, that's okay. You could still be in manufacturing. You could be in supply chain. You need to be contract negotiator for certain material parts. There was this whole idea that came together, and thanks to people like Ram, who I think I saw is on here, who agreed to jump on as subject matter expert, we came up with this, and I've got a visual, if it's all right for me to share the screen so you can kind of see the concept.
Of course.
If that's appropriate here. What we did was we took was a 14, 15 day extravaganza, but it was an hour every day over lunch. And we had 12 high school students. The first couple days, we had an intro to manufacturing. I talked about WinTech. We're an aerospace machine shop, small business. Talked about that, talked about just general challenges that didn't necessarily get too far into details. Then on days 3 and 4, we tackled engineering. So that's when we talked to Ram about design engineering, sustainability throughout the whole process. We talked about supply chain and logistics. And this was right in the midst of the toilet paper shortage here in the US. So that was perfect timing to have those kind of conversations on the, at times ridiculousness shortage of things. Then we segued into the business aspect of manufacturing. So it's not just about making parts, it's about costing. How do you know when you're going to make money? How do you know what kind of risks are okay to take? How do you weigh those risks? Then we went into the actual manufacturing. So my shop manager and my quality manager eventually also popped on, but my shop foreman. We had someone speak to, she runs a manufacturing company out west of me, but she develops the architecture for buildings depending on their climate. So whether it's got to withstand hurricanes or earthquakes or a lot of sun. So we talked about metal processes, chemical processes, walked into quality, talked about employee health and safety, talked about a lot of the requirements here in the US were involving OSHA. And then the center of that circle shows you that we towards the end of the program, we had a job panel. And we also offered them resources, and a couple of folks came on to talk about general leadership in the industry. But the true value to this was exposing students to show them what was out there. And I think even more importantly, to connect these students early on with subject matter experts. And the beauty was, it was really the subject matter experts that as kind-hearted as these people were jumping on an hour of their time to do this, there wasn't a huge investment if they didn't want there to be. It was them jumping on for an hour and them jumping off. So we talk about all the time how we all want, workforce development, and we want to engage the next generation. We all want to go to dinner, but nobody wants to make dinner. That this is dinner. And so I'm trying really hard to share this with a lot of other manufacturers, and heck, a lot of other industries can take this and develop it into their own. And it actually blossomed into, or evolved into, another piece into neurodiverse. So I've got a friend of mine who runs a behavioral group, and she deals a lot with young adults on the spectrum, on the autism spectrum, and with everything from Tourette's to autism to everything in between. And we developed a version of this for neurodiverse. And it was surprising to us because there were certain aspects that the young adults really gravitated towards. So now we're going to go down the rabbit hole and try to take this even further with certain industries there. But we talk so much about the workforce pipeline, and I think people, subject matter experts, people like Ram, I think they're happy to help, but they just want to know where to plug in. So as manufacturers, we just have to, we all have to do a better job in offering those kind of opportunities.
You just love the way that manufacturers come up with extraordinary responses to extraordinary situations. Alison, that was inspiring. I was absolutely on the money. How did you get mixed up with Ram, for goodness sake? Ram,
So
explain
funny.
yourself.
Right. Okay. Finally. So basically, I was at an event where a bunch of business leaders from across the pond were here for a Women in Engineering event in April 2019. I think we all had a nice roundtable dinner, and I still remember the day because that was a week I'd done my first ever flying lesson. I was all giddy and excited, and surprisingly, Alison is from the aerospace industry, and we started talking, and I said, it was this. I was doing all these concentrated things and all that, and we started talking, and we built a connection there where the kind of things Alison was doing, I was keen on understanding, and how the sector works, and we kept in touch, and we were communicating, linked up on LinkedIn, and then this email comes to me out of the blue. Alison is like, this is what we're doing. Why don't you come and will you be able to talk to our students about one of your specialist subjects, design, sustainability, whatever? And I jumped straight in. I'm like, yeah, of course, I'd love to. I mean, inspiring young minds. Yeah, why not? And then, yeah, one thing led to another, and I was a judge at their event last summer as well. Then I came back for the neural spectrum, and I was neural diverse thing, and I was a judge again, literally, last week?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Sure was.
So yeah, I mean, it's been a mind-blowing experience for me, and I've learned so much from these people, and it was a fantastic experience. I met some really good people as well through Allison's network in the US, and I'm linked up with a number of people there now, and you know, it's great. It's a fantastic experience. I absolutely love it. Thank you, Allison, for that.
So no, thank you for agreeing to be a part of it. And Rob brought up the presentation, the judging. So the last 3 days of the program, we tell the students ahead of time from day one, we say you're going to be expected to present to professionals on a STEM concept. You need to solve a problem using manufacturing or solve a problem using engineering. And we've left it really broad last summer. I might work to kind of hone that in, give a little more detail, but it was phenomenal. I mean, Ron, that summer, and we had a student talked about, here's how SpaceX could save money by reusing its booster. It's like, okay, these kids are smarter than me. They had another one who else? Somebody developed a keyboard for paraplegic. Yep. Someone, I mean, the stuff that these kids came up with was fantastic. But not only did they get to do stuff that they were excited about, but they got to practice presenting to professionals, because then the judges quiz them. So you had these presidents of companies, you had these engineers, you had these people that knew what they were doing, and they were quizzing 16 and 17-year-olds who were, trying hard to get scholarships places. And the presentations were judged, and there was a rubric that we had, and I tallied scores, and then students got awards. So we got their names put on trophies and sent. So again, just keeping conversation going. They took pictures of themselves. They ended up in local papers. People start asking questions. So it was a great time.
Wow.
Can I just jump in here?
Yes, of course, Paul.
Is amazing, because most of my life, and I'm doing a talk in a couple of weeks' time, has been in the States. And the energy that you're speaking about here, if all of you could take a copy of that screen grab, but actually use it on your own business as well, because by putting together diverse teams, bringing in subject matter experts from those areas, you can use this as an innovation wheel. And often we did a lot of very early innovation with the likes of John Deere and Dell and Kellogg's, using very similar tools internally. And what you find is, as businesses grow, is they go into silos, and the silos don't talk to one another. So what you're showing here is actually a brilliant tool, not only for bringing in, I guess, the virtual from the outside in, but also using it internally as well. It's a fantastic way of breaking down the verticality of companies. So well done. That was brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll put the website that we put together in the chat here. But there was at one point I came home and my husband said to me, okay, so you're going to sell this thing, right? And I got thinking about it, and I was like, no, because for two reasons. One, it's more valuable to me if every single one of my competitors implemented this, because that just grows the pool, and that gives everybody more people to choose from for hiring. And two, I couldn't take on another job. It's too much work. But so this is really something that I am happy to, if anybody's interested in implementing this in their organizations, please reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat as well. I will send you templates. I'll send you what I got, and take it and run with it. Make it your own. It's definitely rewarding, and it's a great way to give back with your time, which you can't get back, but you're not stroking a check.
Wow. All I can say is, wow, Alison, that was the energy you bring, the inspiration around that. Absolutely fantastic. I'm going to throw this back to David, just because you had been talking about getting young people more involved in manufacturing. What's your your assessment of what Alison has cooked up there?
Yeah, absolutely brilliant, and we need to see much more of this on a much bigger scale. So I think spreading this fantastic idea will be brilliant. And actually, some of my colleagues, I think, could probably get involved in this sort of approach with manufacturers as well. So if we can have manufacturers working with universities and colleges in doing this sort of thing, so we get not only a virtual approach but a blend of different people contributing, I think that would be terrific. Really fantastic approach.
Yeah. Who else has got some thoughts about how we might use that RAM?
Yeah, so we spoke earlier before we moved to Alison. We were speaking about all this innovation and manufacturing and all that. There is this thing called innovation vouchers that the growth company runs. Now, the thing is, it's called an innovation voucher, but an SME, let's say, for example, we've got Lee and we've got Mark Weymouth here. Supposing Lee needs some kind of an Industry 4 piece of innovation and Lee Howarth, and then Mark Weymouth has the technical know-how to do it, Lee cannot go to Mark and use the voucher to pay for Mark's services. Lee has got to go to a university, even though Mark has already got the knowledge within his SME. My question to the growth company and all these is, why not let two SMEs collaborate and one pay for the services of the other? Why is the misconception, or not misconception, why is there the opinion within the UK that the intelligence or the technical know-how or the horsepower lies only with universities and not in the SME community as well? Secondly, that leads on to the domino effect where, sorry, David, you may not like what I'm saying, but I've got to say this. And the domino effect is that a university seems to be more focused on this kind of money to do the research grants and all that. And somewhere the teaching and the academic side of things seems to be getting left behind. And I know there are a few people who might agree with what I say. And maybe there is a way to balance this. Let SMEs collaborate, use the voucher to help one another, and let the universities focus on bringing these brilliant young people up to speed with what the industry wants, rather than focusing too much on their research grants, too much on these things. And I'm sure I can see a few people nodding their heads, and I know some people might agree with it. Why don't we do that? What's preventing all the agencies from doing that? I mean, buy local. Why not buy local from SMEs to SMEs? Question for everyone.
Can I come back? I think that's a really good point. There used to, again, going back to what we were discussing earlier, there used to be funding from RDAs for cluster diversification, which involved an element of that actually. So it was funding to enable SMEs to collaborate. Often, though, there was still a problem with it, and it was a kind of a wheel with spokes rather than the genuine networking that you're talking about. So you'd still be moving it on a stage. But I certainly think this idea of using innovation vouchers, not only for universities, but also SME to SME. Or you might say, look, actually, why don't you do it university and SME so you get a mix? I think that would actually work extremely well. So collaborative vouchers, I think, would be a great idea of encouraging essentially the creation of knowledge networks. Yeah. And, universities don't have a monopoly on this. Let's be honest about it. You're absolutely right. In terms of your other point, I think one of the things that's worked very well are some of the programs that some universities do. So a colleague of mine, Mark Hart, he's at Aston University where I used to work. He's run a program with Goldman Sachs, 10,000 small business program. He helps companies grow quickly. So he brings in small family-owned companies, helps them think about their vision, their strategy, and gets them to think about growing quickly. What that really does, though, like really good MBA exec programs, is create a network. So a good MBA executive, you're actually learning more from your peers than you are from the professors. So we can do that, but I think you're absolutely right in your general point.
Thank you.
Who else got some thoughts on that? Yeah. Sorry, Stephen.
There we go. Yeah. I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about last week, where if you've got an idea, and I've been an innovator and innovated a few products, thankfully I've had some companies behind me to able to get me those products to market. But if you were a small person in your house and you had an idea in your head, this innovation voucher, why is it only universities? I mean, couldn't I go to Paul for a start? I need product designing, I need a concept design, use Paul. Then I might want to use someone like GE who has maybe some 3D printing that I could use, or some metal printing that I could use. Why are these vouchers just restricted to universities? Why can't those vouchers be open to industry itself, where you can use the skill base and the knowledge base that they have to move a project or move something on? I think that will be a better idea than having all this knowledge base go through a university.
Richard's just put his hand up, but I want to just go to David and just suggest that maybe this is the hand of the Treasury saying that the only way to monitor how these vouchers get spent is by having a third party like the university as the channel. It may be something to do with that, because if I can imagine as a civil servant saying, bloody hell, are you suggesting that we're going to just hand out vouchers so that SMEs can go and trade with each other? Who's going to oversee the whole thing? That's me being cynical.
There is an element of that. The other point is the innovation vouchers were invented by universities. So it was a way of getting government money via companies into universities. So universities invented it. So we need something else as well.
Okay. All right. Richard Jones.
Yeah, great. I think the view I have, I've worked in America and I've worked in Germany particularly, and I think that the biggest thing that I've seen vis-a-vis the UK view of whether you put people through university or whether you put them through FE colleges or whether you put them through apprenticeships and then put them through universities, is the most successful one has been in Germany, and there graduates are not la creme de la creme. The people in the middle are la creme de la creme, which are basically the apprenticeships. So it's all based around the middle level of skill, because those people are less likely to leave, especially in an SME. They're more likely to live in that area. With graduates, they're much more mobile and much more interested in traveling, across the country or across the continent. And in Germany, the view is always that you look after your employees, you look after your trainees, you look after your apprenticeships, and you also have the odd graduate. The graduates are the exception. They're not the people that are looked upon as the future of the business. And so frequently there, innovation isn't actually right at the forefront as it is maybe in the UK. But in the UK, we've got lots of innovation, but rarely bring that product to market effectively. Whereas in Germany, they have less innovation, but what they do bring to market is good. And it's well engineered and it works. Look at their exports. Look at the products they make. They didn't do Concorde, but Concorde wasn't a success commercially. It was a technical success, but not a commercial success. What they do is they make products that people want to buy, and they're reliable, and they're showroom friendly. And a lot of that is due to the middle ranking range of skills that their apprenticeships have, and they stay with that company for life.
Lee, did you have a point you wanted to make?
Yeah, I did. To be honest, I'm a little bit discombobulated by all the fantastic positivity on here, and I've kind of lost my train of thought a little bit. But the bottom line is, it's fantastic to see what Alison is doing over there in the States, and the bottom line in Angela's trying very difficult. Angela Lawler, who I do doff my cap to, such a great lady, is doing and trying very hard to do. Engage with business and education. And I go back to the original point, engineering. Nobody knows what an engineer was. When I was a young man, luckily I chose a different path and didn't get into trouble and left the scallywags and got my head down, arse up, and did an engineering apprenticeship. It was either that or going into the RAF, and I wasn't one of being ordered, so I chose the apprenticeship. And the education system then was fantastic, and we were respected as equally as doctors, solicitors, lawyers. The problem with the term engineering is now has become so diluted, where that single word has devalued our trade. I don't want to rant, but effectively, what do you do for a living? I'm an engineer. Yes, I mend washing machines. I install burglar alarms. I'm a vision technician. What does that mean? Yeah, you're a bloody window cleaner. But it's a case of understanding that engineering is sexy. It is an education. It is a higher profession. But industry and needs to recognize this and pay for the value. Now, I want to go on to, we're talking about education, apprenticeships, and graduates. I'm working on a project as we speak with a major prime, and it is refreshing that they've recognized that this prime is archaic in its approach. They put all these graduates around who are very, very educated young people, but they've got no real world experience. So we as an SME are so agile, and because we are engineers at heart, not necessarily on paper, we can understand the application, and we are liaising with their design team, their aerodynamicists. They are engineers, we are machinists, but we are telling them how to design it to make it fit for manufacture. So as soon as the primes realize how agile and the awesome skill sets and technology that is available with SMEs of 5 million, 10 million, 3 million turnover is phenomenal out there. And we need to get behind the SME organization. And going back to government agencies, the Manufacturing Advisory Service, I work closely with the Southwest Manufacturing Advisory Service, and I've had great support from them. I've already mentioned to Nick about the DIT, fantastic. But the problem is, and what quite frankly pisses me off, and I don't apologize for using that term, is we have so many organizations all clambering and cluttering for that pot of investment that the government is trying to put back into the manufacturing sector. And then we have AMRCs, catapults, MTCs, all these various fantastic places. And as David said, long term, that is the right approach. Short term, it's wrong. I've had the AMRC offer me, and it's £2,000 to look at a project. And in my trade, that's less than a week's work. How are you going to develop something within that time frame? It's pittance. And when you find out that that project salesperson is on a 50K a year salary, then where's all the bloody money going? We need one central organization feeding out to regional places and making SMEs aware of what is available, because half of us ain't got a bloody clue, because we've all got our heads down, arse up, doing our utmost. And there's pots of money that we potentially could all utilize and take advantage of this support. But we don't get a government letter coming through saying this is available. That's what we need.
Okay, Lee. Well, I heads down, arse up is my takeaway saying of the evening. I think it's brilliant. Oh yes, a little barefoot Malbec was that? You've got your Malbec. Yes, you've hit it before I have. You so. Okay, well listen, it's 1 minute away from the witching hour. Alison, you can't have a glass of wine until much later, but we can all now follow.
Says who? I'm just kidding.
Okay. David, thank you so much for being with us. And there's an open invitation, please.
I will join in. I've learned more from this than the other way around. So thank you for having me along.
Well, bless your heart. Thank you very much. Alison Giddens, can we please bottle you and clone you or do something and bring you to the UK? Because and Ram, I'd just like to thank you, the best connected man in the world. He is actually. He networks everywhere. He's the best networker I've ever met. But thank you so much for introducing Alison to us. It's been a real joy.
Pleasure, Nick.
Next week, fingers crossed, we'll be talking about things like why SME manufacturers are over the last 5 or 6 years, margins have been squeezed and profitability has gone down, while larger companies, it tends to be going in the other direction. And there's, even though the pandemic has caused a lot of businesses to sort of fall off a cliff, the fact of the matter is they were already suffering some significant problems before then. And I think it's really important. I've got somebody I'm interviewing tomorrow who I want to bring along next week, who's an expert on all this. And your business economics, David, I'd love to have you on board as well with that one. So slight different tack. We'll get away from an industrial strategy and all that stuff. I want to see a rash of virtual internships bloom across the country. And until next week, I shall say thank you for being with us. Really appreciated your company. To our guests again, thank you, and have a great week. See you next time.
Great weekend, everyone.
Thank
See
you.
next time.
Bye.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.